They are so nice. They are so nice. This is the Dan Corder Show. South Africa is a movie.
Welcome to the watch party!
And they respond very well to compliments. Yes, welcome back to the show. Look, we have had a wild week. I don't know if you knew this, but South Africa has world-class investigative journalists. And they often don't get the shine that they deserve because often the biggest news stories are kind of just about the most famous politicians and what they say on the record. Not a lot of investigative journalism is required. But one of the reasons why we know so much about a lot of the awful corruption in this country is surely not the police and surely not their investigations, but because of brave investigative journalists who undergo extreme stress, in some cases extreme danger, in some cases threats on their lives to uncover the truth for all of us. We had a great example last week with Peter Louis Myburgh from the Daily Maverick recording that offered to him to quash investigations into the IDT CEO Tebogo Malaka. And so tonight we're going to speak to one of those investigative journalists about the state of investigative journalism in South Africa, because I think more of us need to celebrate investigative journalists like the heroes that they are, so that they are valued more and better protected, right? So that they can continue to do their work. So without further ado, please welcome from the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, the ICIJ, the one, the only, Micah Reddy is here, everybody. Might be the biggest clap an investigative journalist has ever got.
I feel like a minor celebrity.
Thank you so much for being here. So just for those who don't know about the ICIJ or your career so far, a quick SparkNotes/ChatGPT of your work so far in this industry.
Cool. So the ICIJ, International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, it's a bit of a mouthful, but it is what it says it is. It's a consortium of investigative journalists. We work with media partners around the world on big international investigations.
Okay.
Usually kind of follow the money stuff. If you have heard of the Panama Papers, that was an ICIJ-led investigation. And yeah, our investigations by their very nature have to cross borders. That's the sort of stuff we work on.
So did you study journalism? Is this what you wanted to do, or did it come somewhere else?
I wanted to do journalism, but I didn't study it. I studied history, mostly history, African studies, but with a focus on history. And I think a lot of those sort of skills that you develop studying history are actually quite transferable to investigative journalism.
But then how did you end up being a journalist and then an investigative one?
Investigative a little bit by accident.
Okay.
I wanted to get into journalism, so when I finished studying, I did some freelancing. I traveled around. I was in the Middle East for a while.
Cool.
Came back here, got into media broadly, and was working with the Right to Know campaign, a freedom of expression group. And from there went to Amabungane, the Amabungane Center for Investigative Journalism, which is somewhat of a household name here, and from there to ICIJ.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to talk about investigative journalism in South Africa, because I think a lot of people don't know that much about it, but they sometimes see the consequences of that work, but they don't see everything that goes into a moment like we saw on camera with Peter Louis Myburgh last week. I've spoken with him directly before, and he has told me about the almost constant state of stress and almost fear that there'll be reprisals and repercussions in a country where whistleblowers are killed, auditors checking up on tenders are killed, most recently in Ekurhuleni, and where journalists are really in danger a lot of the time. So when you saw that video, as an investigative journalist in the scene, what were all the things that came through your head?
I mean, that's sort of absolute slam dunk case where there's a smoking gun on camera. That is pretty rare. And I think, from Peter Louis' point of view, he must have felt that it was, hugely rewarding and vindicating that after, because he'd been looking into that case for a very long time. That's the nature of investigative journalism. We work on long, in-depth pieces, and it's slow going and it's often heavy going. And the results can be very rewarding.
A lot of the work of an investigative journalist is drudge work. It's a lot of long investigation stuff. Peter Louis and also Zara Karimi we had on last week from Amabungane speaking about just going through documents after documents, calling people, they refuse interviews, all this stuff. What's the kind of meat grinder work that investigative journalists are kind of doing all the time that can lead to a moment like this or a big conclusion of an investigation?
People tend to think that investigative journalism is kind of cloak and dagger stuff, and you're meeting secret sources and dark parking lots and exchanging information. And there are times when it's a bit like that, but for the most part, and especially the sort of work that investigative journalists in South Africa do, for the most part, that's, trawling through court cases and finding information that is publicly available, right? And cultivating sources. So you're calling a lot of people, you're talking to a lot of people, you're getting the phone slammed down on you a lot of the time. You're looking for ways to get information that is out there. You know it's out there, but it's not necessarily easy to get. It's submitting promotion to access of information form requests, which is our version of the Freedom of Information Act. So we can request information from public and private entities in some cases. And that, the law is great on paper, but actually getting that information can be very, very slow going, very frustrating. So it's a lot of that kind of thing. It's research, and it goes on for a very long time. I mean, sometimes our investigations take years to sort of reach fruition.
And it kind of seems to me like doing all this work, knowing that a lot of people are worried to what you're trying to investigate, but keeping going until someone makes a mistake. Someone briefly says something that they shouldn't. I'm always amazed that you guys get the kinds of documents that you do at all, because a lot of the time it's in the documentation that is so condemning, and it's like right there so long as anybody can get their hands on it. But I also wanted to ask, because obviously investigative journalists are known entities, maybe not to the public, but certainly to people committing crimes, they are. Because people start to know, okay, Peter's written all these books, you've done this stuff in the past, don't talk to them. But I'd like to hear about the mental health toll of being an investigative journalist at the point that very powerful people who have access to violence, or at least meddling or bot campaigns or whatever, see you as an enemy and then try to silence you, take you out, intimidate you out of work, shut down your life.
Yeah, it does. It comes with the role. A recent case that I can recall very vividly because it happened to me while I was at Amobungane. We wrote about this notorious businessman, Zunaid Moti, and he came after us in a very vicious way. Threats and litigation, and so and that's very draining just to sort of respond to that. When you have to leave everything behind, put your work on hold to rush to court to defend yourself over what is ultimately vexatious litigation. Lots of journalists, particularly female journalists, I mean, this is routine, get harassed online, get harassed, journalists get harassed physically as well. We saw that particularly around during the time of Zuma and the Guptas, where journalists were very publicly smeared. There was all sorts of very coordinated online disinformation campaigns. There were mobs pitching up outside journalists' houses, defacing their houses, that sort of thing. And it's all very nasty stuff. It comes with the job. But there isn't a huge amount of support, I think, for outside of their newsrooms and their circle of colleagues. There isn't a huge amount of support for journalists who have to go through that, who have to, for instance, pay to defend themselves from vexatious litigants. I mean, there was one time when we were threatened with legal action in the UK.
Oh wow.
And just to defend ourselves would have completely bankrupted the organization. This was when I was at Amobungane.
Sure.
And it was, again, a completely vexatious case. They just wanted to stop us publishing and intimidate us. Thankfully, there is strong sort of civil society support, but often it's not enough, really. And newsrooms are increasingly overstretched and under-resourced.
Yeah.
So it's a very difficult climate at the moment.
Are all investigative journalists, and I mean this with love, a special kind of freak? Y'all are into some stuff, guys. like to choose. I know it's incredibly rewarding. It's justifiably honorable and noble, but it's an enormous toll. It's an enormous sacrifice. I don't know if you are a masochist, but like it does feel like what a brutal thing to go through. It can't just be about the money. I know the pay is not good for investigative journalists in particular.
That is
like what is the reward? Most of the time for doing this kind of work, which can have such a toll on your personal life, your normal life, make you feel deeply unsafe.
Look, I think perhaps we've watched too many journalism movies and spy movies, and there is certainly a type who are attracted to this job. There is a kind of thrill to it. I mean, I'm not an adrenaline junkie, but there is a certain kind of adrenaline that comes with an investigative piece. When it really starts to kind of gain momentum and you think you're onto something. And it's true. I mean, journalists are a bit of a tribe, and I think there is a very strong sense of duty among a lot of journalists. So that's definitely one thing that I think that sort of drives a lot of investigative journalists. I think the fact that it can be a very, very rewarding job, and you know the impact of your work is often very visible, right? Take for example this IDT case. Every day, investigative journalists are uncovering corruption and abuse, and sometimes the impacts are sensational, like with this case, like with the Gupta leaks, for instance, that led to a real sea change.
And with the Panama Papers,
and the Panama Papers, and sometimes it's a very subtle change. Sometimes the impact of a story is only apparent a long way down the road.
Right.
But it is impactful, whether it leads to policy changes or a swing in public opinion or legal victories or corrupt politicians being arrested or whatever the case may be.
Sure.
And I think that's a very important factor in motivating investigative journalists.
For sure. So what do we need to do to help investigative journalists in this country? Beyond the obvious, like get them paid better. What do we need in this country to do far better to help investigative journalists? And I'm talking a bit about the government, I'm talking a bit about law enforcement, but I'm also talking about us regular folks.
Yeah. It's a big question. I mean, look, the threats to journalists are very real. They're very real at a global level, in South Africa as well. I mean, you spoke about whistleblowers. It doesn't take a huge leap of the imagination to think that journalists may be targeted next. So far, journalists are pretty well protected, but there is a crisis of journalism. The revenue model, with the rise of the tech giants, is no longer sustainable.
Yeah.
And so we need to find novel ways of funding journalism. It would be great if ordinary people started paying for news, but I think we need to talk about sort of progressive taxation, ways of funding journalism through sort of ring-fenced public funds. It also means reining in the tech giants, right? I mean, the tech giants like Google and Facebook, Meta, all of them need to be regulated. They need to be paying for the news that journalists produce, but they benefit from. Mm-hmm. And there are some encouraging signs. We've seen moves towards that sort of litigation across in various parts of the world, and in South Africa there is a big push for that as well. So antitrust regulation, that sort of thing. And as negative as we can be about the media landscape in South Africa, we have to also give credit where credit is due. I think we are in this country very, very free as journalists. We can write what we want. Public trust in media, according to surveys, which, the surveys aren't perfect, but they suggest that public trust in media is relatively high in South Africa compared to other countries with relatively free media.
I was laughing before the show. Usually at the end of an interview, I say, so what's next for you? But I guess that's all heavily NDA'd in terms of what you're working on right now. But Micah Reddy, thank you so much for your time. I deeply appreciate it. And to all investigative journalists in South Africa, thank you so much. Micah Reddy, everybody. Amazing.